was about maybe 16, 17, and I bought this record.
Uh-huh.
Did you see it? Yeah. Fred Hersch trio at the Vanguard. One thing that really came to me was your deep and earthy sound. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your vision of sound and how you've worked on it, or who kind of heroes of yours were for that. Yeah, what your thoughts are on that?
Well, it was definitely a priority, or became a priority over time, primarily because early on I was, vilified for my sound. At the time I was in Baltimore, and I was originally a guitarist and switched to electric bass, and then came to the acoustic bass from the electric, like many people of my generation. And so I brought some facility to the bass, but I had really basically no sound concept. And one of the benefits of being in Baltimore was there was a real mixture of older players and younger musicians there. So I got an earful about who my influences should be. And so, so I started to do some archaeology, and I started checking out, well, of course, Ron and PC and Buster Williams and Tommy Potter and Wellman Proud. Those were like influences, just to get the part of my sound together that wasn't happening, because I did have some facility and some sustain and and was fluid on the instrument, but I was definitely sacrificing sound for technique, I think, and right. So I just had to totally switch that around for myself. But philosophically, I think I was also kind of raised up by these guys to think that you should go for your own sound concept, since we're not singers, so we're manipulating an apparatus, and we should be able to get any sound you might desire to achieve on the instrument if you just figure out how to manipulate it. And so I guess there's some sort of priority to have your own sound as well, but I just tried to make it human as well, and I think, compensating for the fact of not being particularly large as a human being, you have to learn to use gravity to your advantage and things like that. So I had to make a priority of that, to just try and I think that's generally, I don't do anything extraordinary with that, but I think allowing your limbs to be as heavy as possible so that, you don't have to work as hard, and to let big muscles do the big jobs and small muscles do the little jobs, and, not vice versa. So, but yeah, I had to make sound a priority. Also, maybe what sealed the deal with me on that was, I think back in, it's like 1984, maybe, a friend of mine, Marc Copland, was at that time beginning to play with Gary Peacock on occasion, and he brought him to Washington, D.C., and he didn't have an instrument to play, so Marc asked if he could borrow mine, and of course I said yes. And when I went to hear him that night, it was just kind of a mind trip to see someone else doing what he was doing, how much music he was making with your own instrument, knowing that he's only had it for a few hours, and maybe didn't even bother to play with it. So the fact that he could get his own personal sound that was so drastically different from the sound that I was getting was also fascinating to me. So kind of that point was brought home on my own instrument by someone like that. So, that kind of sealed the deal as far as making a philosophy of, well, maybe I can have my own sound and also work to have a good sound also.
Did you talk to him about that?
Yeah, we hung out a little bit, and not so much about sound. He was more about, like, now play that scale, imagining that the music is coming from your kneecap or things like that. He was, coming from a very Zen place. And part of me's rolling my eyes like, come on, man, give me the good stuff. But actually, that is the good stuff. So, but just the fact that you could just concentrate on tone and just slow your mind enough to really focus on your speaking voice was kind of a revelation to me too, because when you're young, you're just trying to research and development, seek and find and accumulate as many tools as you can. And so it was nice to just say, wait a second, maybe you already have enough for now, and just let's learn how to use it and say something. So yeah, so I mean, those are all lessons. Hearing great players do what they do in person is, life changing. Yeah, sometimes.
It's funny that you mentioned Gary, because he was one I had on my list of possible influences I thought you might have. So, sometimes when I hear you play, I can hear. It seems to me that you really admire him. Not that you're copying or anything, and you have your own sound and your own thing going, of course. But sometimes our influences shine through, and it's always seemed to me that you took some of his very distinctive abilities and took them in another direction that he wouldn't go into, which is nice to hear. Then
perhaps, yeah. I mean, yeah, just his flexibility and the fact that he truly loved playing these disparate styles. To play with Bill Evans and Albert Ayler in the same back-to-back, perhaps, back-to-back weeks is just incredible. And, it's really, and just his willingness to serve the moment and to not, to really play with risk and chance. I mean, that's really important, I think, And, so philosophically, just as a model of what's possible as far as freedom too within function and all those types of issues. It's just that it's possible to rethink perhaps how you're doing things and still have it work, and that you're not relegated to a certain specific role, although you can embrace the role and find some way, like, well, I want to do this role, but I want to do it in a way that's more fun or something. So, but just the fact that any of that is possible is, he's an example of that it's possible.
I'm always interested in these really, really important concert experiences where you in your mind also always go back to for a certain lesson that you learned right there. Maybe you can share some of these experiences.
I guess my first experience with jazz that started to really turn me onto it, I had no idea what I was even looking at, was I saw Weather Report in 1974, I think. So it was like the band with Alex Acuna and Alfonso Johnson.
Yeah.
And I had heard, I'm 13 years old or whatever, and I've heard no jazz up to this point in my life. And it was like my parents were on vacation in Ohio or something, and it was a double bill with Tony Bennett, that's who they wanted to see. So Weather Report and Tony Bennett.
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. It's better than two of the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like wild, like, so that kind of blew my mind, although I didn't then go and immediately check out Weather Report and whatever. And but when I think back on it, it did plant something in my mind, about that. And there was a club in Washington, D.C. called the One Step Down that would bring in people, and it's very intimate, basically like a corner bar with a baby grand, and you could sit right around the curve of the piano. And just so close to the players. And I also saw Eddie Gomez there with Joanne Brackeen just playing duo. And I don't think many people were playing in odd time signatures back then either. This might have been like 1979 or 78. And doing that duo and how he was keeping that going and propelling it without drums, I hadn't really heard that sort of thing either before. And so that was kind of important for me as well. And I don't know, most of the music I hear now is like I'm like off to the side at a festival, and
right.
So there aren't that many other examples really, other than some bands. I remember Charles Gale at the Knitting Factory, and the first time I heard Anthony Braxton's quartet with Mark Dresser and Marilyn Crispell and Jerry Hemingway, and hearing them at the Knitting Factory, they were playing from a book of music, but they weren't necessarily playing the same pieces. They were just composing them, but those decisions were, I think, being made by Anthony. And just the fact that music could be so modular and put together in creative ways outside of the content of the music as well was really like, wow, the light bulb went on. for me around that. And I think a lot of people, from the downtown scene and knitting factory folks that, at least that I came in contact with, were influenced by that way of thinking too. Mm. What if we do just juxtapose these? What's the end result? And, I think that's a really organic way to approach music making too. Like one of my hobbies is bird watching, or it's more than a hobby, but it's not a real thing. And when you walk out in the morning and you just hear the dawn chorus or whatever in your bushes, I mean, it's kind of the same idea. Everyone's doing their thing. It's a different song, but it's happening simultaneously. And to me, like, the juxtaposition of that and what happens harmonically if you choose to listen that way is pretty interesting. So
yeah, it's beautiful.
I mean, you have to open up your acceptance level of what what's cool for yourself, I think. But that's kind of what I'm into finding is what are the end results of putting this against that.
Yeah, I think that's how most of the masters work, like putting things together that haven't been put together before in that way, or that have been put together but not by a person like that.
Yeah, or just say, well, let's just try it first. What's this going to sound like? And and even if you just have a general idea. And sometimes I don't know. I find it's playing free music as well. Sometimes the intent behind it or the way you sell the idea is as important as what the idea is, or more important. So it's like,
can you exemplify?
Well, I mean, I've taken a piece where I just basically Frankenstein two things that do not belong together in any way, and were not conceived to be that way either, and just. And I did this because, and I may never have done it if I didn't have a computerized notational system where I could just paste things on top of each other to get an idea. But I'm not proud. I'll admit that I did that, and then just checked out the result. And then you have to ask yourself, well, can I accept that as is, or do I need to sand off some rough edges or dovetail some things together? And I don't know. That's kind of an interesting approach to composition as well, rather than sitting back, staring at the blank page and waiting for
the next note,
sunbeams of inspiration to grace you. It's like, wow, how about if I just slop those two things together and see if you can fashion it into something you can live with. I mean, and yeah, what about music that I don't even like that I make? What does that feel like to make that type of music? So I'm willing to go there as well, and just to see what that is, see if it.
That's cool. This reminds me of a lesson I had with a great piano player from Germany called Achim Kaufmann. I don't know if you've heard him.
Oh yeah, no, I know his music. Yeah, he's great.
And I told him I was super uninspired and didn't know what to write, and then he gave me a big page of thoughts about how to maybe start a tune, and one of them was write a really bad song.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried, and then I showed it to my teacher, who was a friend of Achim. And I told him, yeah, I did this. Achim told me to write a really bad song, and then my teacher was like, yeah, I know why he did. It's a pretty good song, because you come in the process. You somehow become attached to it, and you offer something that is from you. That's comes out of an experience, and you end up with something that is maybe the intent was something different, but it became something that can be perceived as something else, and also for other people. Then
yeah,
they don't know the backstory to what you splice together. Together.
Yeah. But if it creates something interesting, then, I think it's totally valid. I mean, and it just brings an improvisational aesthetic to composing or, organizing music. And yeah, so why not? It's like, can I make something out of this thing, this orphaned idea, or the ugly duckling, or whatever it is? Usually those ugly ducklings usually live very interesting lives, so why not? It doesn't have to be an ugly idea, but just like that's a messed up thing, and then just make that the point. You're just like pushing on this sensitive area that aggravates. I mean, and I guess we're just kind of manipulating people's attention anyway, including ours. So that's kind of all we're really doing.
Manipulating our, can you say
attention,
that again?
Your attention or your awareness.
Mm-hmm. How do you manipulate it? Can you explain?
Well, I'm just saying that can be kind of the reason that you're playing music, is to essentially, I don't know, engage people's attention, and you can either take them to some place or just kind of provoke some kind of response or invite them to have a feeling about something. And it doesn't have to be you aspiring to create the most beautiful thing they've ever heard. It can be just, I'm going to, create an expectation, and then maybe I deliver it immediately. Maybe I make you wait for a long time about it. Maybe I, yeah, but that's what composing is too. It's managing expectations and, to your own, and maybe to not even any particular end, but just to do it. It's like, here, check this out for a minute. And it's like the musical equivalent of eye candy or something like that. Would just engage your mind for a moment and then move on. So I don't know. I'm just trying to keep it interesting day after day. A reason to get out of bed. So if I think about things in this way, it doesn't become like you go into a manufacturing job and doing the same thing every day. So whatever keeps you in the game, I think is engaged. I mean, is probably a fair game.
I feel like when I listen to your compositions, to me, each one of them has a very clear vibe, a very clear direction. I'm totally invited in a certain kind of vibe. I really have to think about Like It Never Was, your composition. It's as clear as it can be. It's crystal clear for me. Is that something you think about? Create a certain kind of vibe, or does it come natural out of the musical ingredients you put into the composition?
Well, Well, that tune is kind of an exception to how I normally work, because that was just like one of those, you literally play it and then hope you don't forget it and write it down. So it didn't.
Oh, okay.
It's really just keep descending, and then I'll just see if I can keep this. So I guess what I often do, I guess, is I just have elements, and I try to keep them alive for as long as possible until they either I lose interest, or who I imagine the listener to be would lose interest, or I forget what the original idea was, and it just naturally morphs into something close to that. But my best attempt to recall what it is or was. So that's just a descending line, and seeing if I could keep that going and have it integrate with the melodic thing, which is also just trying to keep a simple idea going, and then seeing where it seems to breathe or end, and so I feel in a way that I'm kind of like not a composer, but I don't have children, but if I did, what I would imagine a good parent would be is like they're your ideas, so they have your values, but I'm trying to allow them to be what they want to be and not control it in a way, and say, well, is this where it wants to go? Okay. Like I can believe that would go there, and yet hopefully still have it be somewhat interesting and not predictable. So but I guess that's where your judgment comes in that way. Like, okay, I can believe that would go there and that would do that, but does it create something when you add them together that's still that way? So, I don't know. Those are things I think about. Sense. But often I'm trying to get out of the way, of what I'm doing, and just say, what does it want to do? This voice or this line, and then often with no real idea of how it's performed. I mean, in a way, I feel like sometimes good material could be performed many different ways, and that could be actually a hallmark of something that's, or a characteristic of strong material, is that you could re-envision it in many different ways, and then that'd also be fun for improvisers to work with, because for my own bands, they're often made up of composers themselves and also, or strong improvisers that enjoy manipulating material. So if I can envision a piece in many different ways, then the band will hopefully enjoy playing it, and night to night it can take on radically different approaches if we choose to do that. So that's the dream, though, is to have a band that can do that. And I've gotten close to it for a minute, for a few gigs, but to have a long-standing band where you could play radically differently night after night, the same pieces would be, great, I think.
You have a very distinctive relationship to Tom Rainey. You guys just sound unbelievable together, and it's just such a great match of characters and sounds and groove.
I played with him last night, actually.
Wow.
We don't play that often anymore, but hopefully that changes. But we have a gig in Norway in a couple weeks too, with Mark Feldman and Sylvie Courvoisier too. So
beautiful.
But I mean, we're kind of, I don't know, played so many gigs. It's just kind of like we think the same way, I think, or it just is a thing. It's kind of inexplicable in a way, but it just is,
You didn't really talk about specific things during your time together?
No, we always just, I think we're kind of purists in that way. I mean, not that we wouldn't if we needed to, but we just do it. Well, I think we just played a lot in a lot of different configurations together, and the first time we ever played was Ben Monder went into the studio just to make like a demo tape and doing like tunes really, and maybe one original, and I'd never played with him before and even felt it then. I don't know, there's just certain people you totally hook up with immediately and can't really describe it, and then as we both kind of grew, however directions we go, we just keep finding new ways to kind of I don't know, keep the interaction fresh. But yeah, we just played a lot with Fred and lots of bands. And
super different stuff also, right? I mean,
Tim Byrne, that was an improvising trio, although we tried to convince people that they were compositions, but we tried to improvise with a compositional aesthetic, which is really difficult. Like we were putting ourselves through the ringer that way, as far as putting pressure on ourselves to really be, rigorous. But that was that was a real learning experience to play really improvised music night after night and try not to repeat yourselves, on a tour. So, you experience the extremes of ecstasy and nadir, both, sometimes in a few minutes period. But I learned a lot through that, and we didn't talk about it. We just do it. And I think there's total trust there. He knows I trust him entirely, and I'm sure the same. So, and totally willing to sound terrible too. And that's okay too.
Wow. Okay.
I'm willing to. I don't think willing to sound terrible, but I mean, it's whatever, it happens sometimes.
Yeah. 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 How did you learn to let go of that? I mean, you always sound beautiful to me, but as you're saying yourself, the giving up that that urge to always sound amazing, or the other way around. You said it, I think. How did you learn to let go?
Well, I don't know. I think I realized I like that kind of music more than, I mean, I like to hear music that's very polished and, impeccable in a way as well. But I'm more interested when something's going on here that's weird and I don't know. And it just feels more exciting to be involved with something like that. Yourself, if you're playing in a band and it's high level, but it's you kind of know what's going to happen and when, and it's like, let's see how perfectly we can do this. I mean, that's one kind of, I guess, satisfaction or feeling, but the ones like, wow, how do we get here, and what am I doing, and those are the things that hook you. I think like get you addicted to improvising in the first place. It's like, what? That's magic, and so I think you don't lose sight of that thing, because you might as well do it on your own terms. It's its own reward in a way. So I remember going to hear Paul Bley and Gary and Paul Motion at Birdland, and a couple nights in a row, and one night was amazing, and the other night was not nearly as amazing, but still really cool, because they were like making up some kind of standard that was a combination of 4 different tunes, and
that's a great example of somebody who let go also of sounding amazing.
I think those guys are uninterested in playing any other way. Actually, I think that's just who they are, and it's like, why do I want to control it? There's nothing in that for me, and so I think that's likely why, a big reason they approach it that way. It's like that's where the good stuff is. The sweetest fruits at the end of the branch, or whatever.
I have a lot of drummers on my list that I wanted to talk to you about, because you played with so many of the great and my favorite drummers. My favorite drummer since I was a kid is Jack DeJohnette. So I was wondering, like, what goes through your head when you started playing with a figure like that, and how did you approach that?
Well, I'm just trying to hang in there. The first time I got to play with Jack was on a Don Byron project with Bill Frisell. We did a record for Blue Note called Romance with the Unseen, and
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, so I'm pretty proud of that record. I don't know if the critics liked it, but I think it's a really strong, just kind of a playing record. There's no
great. I'll check it out.
There's no high concept about it, but it's just really solid playing. And so there were a couple rehearsals, and then we did a concert up in Woodstock, and then recorded, and then did some gigs. And I was nervous, but I don't think there was any drummer that I had heard more in my life up to that point than him, because I'd binged out on most of the records he's on. Yep. So it felt familiar to play with him, like, oh, I know what that is, and so I just tried to be responsible for myself, basically, and just play what I heard, and because he doesn't hold your hand playing wise. He plays with you and hears everything, and it's fantastic. But if he hears something that he wants to pursue, he's going to pursue it, and he's trusting that you're going to be able to hang in there and just take care of yourself and be there at the finish line or wherever the thing releases. And so it just felt like being in a giant Cadillac, kind of cruising down the road at maybe 70 miles an hour with really good suspension, and just kind of coasting toward the horizon. It just felt like we could have just gone on forever, in some kind of eternal kind of feeling. I remember John Abercrombie talking about how it felt to play with Billy Higgins, who I never got to play with, but he said it was like that, just like it was like if you were playing toward the horizon.
Wow.
All the time, and that was like, wow. And so I think I got a taste of what that feeling was with him. It just kind of, you're almost tapping into something that's eternal. I don't know, that's always been there, and we just get on it. And I also got to play with John Surman and their in-laws. So, and some of the records with that were insane. Those guys egged each other on into insanity. They're 15 years old, and they were just physically kicking my ass, those two together. So that was like a whole nother level. But he's, I think he's just kind of nourished by playing, so he has tons of energy. And
did he give you any advice or notes or?
Well, not so much. I did go up to his we played some up at his place, and I think at one point you know, he might have asked me to push the time a little bit and just doing a session at his house, which I appreciate it, because you kind of want to know how it's coming across to people. And he plays bass himself, actually, so it's kind of fun to hear him play. Yeah,
How does he sound?
He sounded good. I mean, the man knows where it belongs, so I think it's going to translate pretty well. But yeah, but other than that, not really. No, man. I mean, these cats they just play.
Yeah.
And hopefully you hear things, And
how is it different from Billy Hart? I mean, it's a different person, obviously, but still.
Yeah. I mean, and Billy he's kind of a daredevil. I consider him to be like a daredevil in a way. Like, he'll juxtapose things, like we were talking about earlier, with paste something on there and just see if he can make that work and manipulate it. And I think Billy has a dramatic approach to time, so you can bend it just a little bit for dramatic effect, and modulate the feeling of something in very subtle and sophisticated ways. I just feel like there's a lot of finesse within his time, like elegance, but also some funk to it, And
one of the great times I saw you live was with John Abercrombie's quartet with I think it was Mark Feldman. Might have been 2 occasions. One time with Mark Feldman and Joey Barron at the Stadtgarten in Cologne. And that might have been in the time of there was a time of fluxation in Abercrombie's band, I think, having to do with Mark Johnson leaving his band, and then I think you taking over. I don't know if that was right in the middle of it, or already the end result. But how is it in a situation like this for you, when you have somebody who's, I think Mark Johnson is a little bit older than you, maybe, and I don't know how your relationship is, but how do you treat it? Do you go out and listen to the recordings where Mark has played on, kind of as a preparation for the job, or do you kind of leave it more open and see what you bring to the table on your own?
Well, no, I'll deny it in public, but I don't really. I mean, I'll listen to recordings or sample tapes if somebody sends me music ahead of time that looks complex or whatever, and I really need the model. But I mean, I know Mark's playing really well, and I've heard that band live a bunch of times, oftentimes on festivals, So for me with John, it was somewhat of a different situation, because I used to go over to his house. We lived not far from each other, so I play sessions over there all the time. So and we had made records in the past with Marc Copland and Billy and whatever. So I did have pretty familiar with John anyway. And and I knew a lot of these tunes from rehearsals and things. So, I guess I feel like if I'm there, they must on some level want my opinion. So maybe I shouldn't listen to how somebody did something else, unless they're just not happy. Like if I played with them and they said, that's really not it, man. I mean, then I would, check it out and try and be diligent and try and digest the intent. But I guess my first assumption is, well, okay, I'll just show up and be a conversationalist. I mean, like these talk shows they have in France especially, but where people talk about political or cultural ideas, and you have a group of 4 or 5 people around a couch or a dais and talking. And I just feel like that's kind of the idea with playing too, is, you're invited to contribute to the conversation. And so you just come in with your ideas and kind of flow with whatever the topics are. And so that's kind of my modus. And I'm just trying, study the music so I have that part of it together. And, but as far as how I'm going to react, I just, I guess I'm still on a trajectory to try and truly trust my instincts as much as I can, and you know, I think it's becoming a greater percentage of the time over time, but it's still not where I would like it to be. So I want to keep testing that, I guess, by just showing up and seeing if I can just, you know, blurt it out and improvise the whole approach and see what happens. Because that's frankly the fun of it anyway. It's, you know, like, let's see what goes in the filter, and now what do? I have to come up with something. Because, you know, Joey's going to do something totally different night after night anyway. So there's really nothing to prepare for, you know.
Yeah.
And John will go other places too. So that's kind of fun. So I know it's funny because you don't really know how to prepare for those things other than just make yourself the best musician you can be at the moment, and then, you know, stay open and hope you make decisions that other people think are good ones.
Yeah.
You know, there's no accounting for taste sometimes.
Yeah, you and Joey, you have a very great relationship to me. I mean, it sounds to me amazing when I hear you guys together on different occasions. I talked to Joey also for this interview series, and we talked about one of those Stadtgarten gigs where he picked like maybe the smallest cymbal he could find at the Stadtgarten and take that as his main right cymbal for the gig. I don't know if you remember that night, but I'm sure there have been many nights like this.
Yes, so he's irreverent, yes.
You guys would do tradings, you know, trading fours or eights or whatever, and he would play these amazing things on the toms and on the drums, and then he would go back to the little cymbal. And yeah, I can only imagine how it feels like having somebody who will bring stuff like that every night to the bandstand, and really keep you on your toes.
Yeah, and he brings a wild card element. And also, he keeps it from getting too cerebral, or, you know, like we're taking ourselves too seriously. It's like, well, how about a little comic relief here, or something needs to happen, so I'm going to make it happen. And but he's so amazing with the detail of what he does too. Like sometimes, I mean, I don't often listen to things I play on, but if I do, I'm always taken with what he's doing and just the kind of the perfection and the compositional integrity of it, but the creativity within that, it's just like, you know, that's what makes it work. I think, you know, he's improvising, but in a compositional way that also interfaces really interestingly with the song, the greater song. You know, that's a high accomplishment.
How did you work on your? I really feel that you have a great harmonic depth, and how did you study harmony?
Well, I mean, it's a long process, I guess, but I met Marc Copland when I was young, like I was 18, I guess, and when I first met him, and we played together. And I mean, I had come from like a garage band, and then I got into like big band music and sort of that kind of way of, and wanted to be like a big band arranger and composer originally, and then kind of got away from it. But what was important was playing with Marc and realizing, I think we played a little bit, and I guess he realized I had a little bit of potential, so he started hipping me to the real work, I guess musicians call it, or something, you know, like we did like All of You, and he had like 8 different ways to play the first 8 bars or whatever, and I was like, wow. But he hipped me to this book by Ernst Toch called Shaping Forces in Music, and it's a small book, but it has really interesting chapters that illustrate what he's talking about with great clarity. And there's a chapter there on harmony, and his major point is that, you know, it's if you can think about harmony as arrested horizontal motion instead of vertical sonorities only, that you have a chance to create something really interesting harmonically. So he takes a Riemenschneider, a Bach chorale, throws away 3 of the voices, and said, rather than choose notes for these other voices with harmonic implications in mind, I'm just going to write 4 good melodies, which he does, and then you play it and you go, wow, that's wild. And so just that idea alone kind of blew things open for me that, that harmony is about tension and release and arriving at a certain place eventually, and then moving on from there. And so that definitely made me realize that, I do need to be here, but I don't have to get there via any particular route. So let me try these other routes. And so there's that kind of work, studying standards and trying to see how things connect, and studying the great bassists about how they work through changes, but studying lots of 20th century music as well, just to see how that holds together. Shostakovich, and for me was a good studying point, because I feel like the interesting harmony that results from that is all kind of linearly derived. So it's taking that ideas from that Ernst Stock book and just kind of making it obvious, like string quartet number 8, whatever. There's the way it unfolds and moves is just beautiful and really unpredictable and yet inevitable at the same time. And so there are pieces that kind of drive those points home to you, and then just try and manipulate them. Like Michael Tippett's music, who I don't feel gets much love from folks. The Cognoscenti, I guess. It's a concerto for orchestra that I think is really kind of important. Ditiu's music, I like some of his music. Stuff like his mirror voicing thing. But I think the ear, the listener knows that something's going on, even if they don't know what it is, and that it's more intriguing when whatever that thing is going on than when it's not going on. So even if you try to disguise the thread, I think it's important to have some kind of thread woven through what you're doing, so that because I think somebody perceives it, even on a subconscious level, because I think listeners are far more sophisticated than I think some musicians think they are, because when there's something's tying us together. I don't know what it is yet, but there it is again. I just love that kind of subconscious work that composers do sometimes. I guess I got hammered into me too that the outer voices were really important in not only composing but also in playing. So that trying to find ways through to arrive where you want to, and hopefully in an artful way. And it's just like a challenge. So a game in a way. I don't know, but I guess I'm drawn to certain sounds, so I just keep trying to learn, study. But I don't have like a system. I have textbooks here, but I haven't really looked at them lately. But I'm interested now with like some of the I feel like harmony concrete, almost I would call it. There's some Autechre records that I really like from the last decade, maybe like Oversteps and XI, and in a way the rhythmic material creates pitch material as well, and then they also manipulate that so that you hear harmony that's produced
through rhythm,
not by harmony instruments, but just through whatever happens to be sounding, and it makes a composite harmonic sound. And there's some really interesting people working with that, like some modular synthesizer people that I've been checking out, like Gabriel Menzanada, and and they're taking that idea of using modular percussion and sine wave, different manipulative voices, and combining them and letting them do their natural born thing. So it's like a dawn chorus in an electronic box, right? And just letting it go and modulating it over time, and which is to me what composing is anyway. But I also play with people that are. I didn't make it a priority to really play notes that I thought my favorite pianists and guitarists would want to hear. People that externally think harmonically.
And you've been playing with some of the greatest piano players of our century, or the 2 centuries. Certainly one of
not old.
I mean, certainly a lot of my heroes, Carruthers and Marc Copland, of course. Are there any other harmonic discoveries that you kind of maybe even can pin down to experience you had with one of them? I'm really interested in these little moments. Like you're telling me that story about all of you from Marc Copland. That's something where I'm like, this is this is the stuff I really like, because I can remember all these experiences of myself when somebody else showed me a different, harmony to a certain standard. I totally remember these moments, and they're really dear to me. And I think that's for everybody that is harmonically very interested. These moments are special,
Yeah. I mean, I think, and sometimes you can make your music fresh by just, I mean, we all, I guess, we have limited keyboard ability. I think the compulsion as composers, a lot of people have sounds that they like, or their hands are just grooved to make certain shapes, so they go for those things. But all you have to do is change one thing in there, and it's fresh or it's different. And that, so, willing to do that too. I'm writing pieces where I'm offsetting the bass pitch by a half step to, like there's just a grind there that is momentary, and just exploring what that creates. What kind of a feeling does that create? And can I make that wrongness sound right also? That kind of thing. Like, can I make that stop annoying me when I do it? And I'll take that approach to writing as well. Years ago, I had this piece. It was just a repetitive bass line, but what I did over top of it was designed as an experiment to see if I could distract people from the fact that it's been the same bass line going over and over for like 6 minutes, by trying to keep them distracted over here with this,
Absolutely.
And so the piece became about playing with people's attention, and could I successfully keep them from getting just exhausted by the bass line.
I think you did the same thing to me when I listened to when we talked about that piece on the Contact record with the descending bass notes. At a certain point, I realized, okay, it's descending. Maybe I didn't realize that from the start, but it was never like, oh, it's descending, I know where it's going. And you made me listen to the melody even more. That sometimes the descending thing can have a monotony in it, or something that can be like, okay, it's descending or whatever. You did exactly that there.
Well, I think that, the tension and release part of whatever happens is what drives the music forward, I guess. So even if something's momentarily uncomfortable, you're trusting that you're gonna manage the tension in some way, that there's a certain satisfaction. Well, I don't know if you feel that when you listen to me, but I actually feel like physically sometimes satisfied if something resolves a certain way, or
absolutely, yeah.
Or whatever, pleased, or I don't know what it is, but it's a physical feeling. So yeah, I guess that's part of what you're after too, is you're trying to hold the person's interest, and part of that is to try and keep it not totally predictable that way. Something has to be wrong, a little bit wrong, or a little bit personal.
Yeah.
I got another person with that is like Ralph Towner's music. I mean, I just think, I learned so much from his music, and just the feeling. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to write on guitar sometimes too, and just say, like, this is available here, or I just accidentally played this note a half step off, and then, but that sounds amazing, so that amplifies that point of, the old school thing was you're only a half step away from a good note, but you're also only a half step away from a really, weird note that could maybe revitalize your whole thing. Like when you cook the same recipe over and over again, you finally put something a little bit different in there, and it's like, just because it's different, it's better.
Or through an accident, something drops in it, and you're like, and then why didn't I put it in it before? Yeah.
Right. Or now it's too so-and-so, so I have to, how can I counter that and make that into something else, and yeah, so at the end of the day, I guess nobody's really going to, you just have to do it on your own terms so that you feel like this is the best I can do at the moment, given the situation, and hope it connects with somebody that cares.
Yeah. Maybe you can go into a certain, I don't know what your daily routine is when you have some time with the instrument. Do you have something like a daily routine or things that you're checking out at the moment, that you're working on at the moment?
Well, it's pretty utilitarian, my approach. I've got, I'm shedding the music that I have to play next week, just working on it. But I don't spend a lot of time on the instrument at home, to tell you the truth. I do play every day, and just to keep the calluses cool and flexible. And I'm working on a project that's just me, so I'm working on some things. But
solo.
Yeah, well, some solo bass, but some guitar duo things, right? Overdub and some other synthier things, and some
nice.
A mixed bag of things. They're just different environments for it's going to be like a series of soliloquies. They're going to be short pieces, but some of the idea was just to improvise actually with patches that I'd actually never played before. So you literally hear me adjusting on the fly with something I've never, kind of like true compositional improvisation, where I have no idea what's going to happen. I've never played this instrument before, kind of, in a way. And
wow.
But I don't know if I have the courage to make some of that public. But it's hard to know.
I'd be interested.
Rabbit hole after a while, that it's like, this is either god awful or it's kind of cool. So but I'm going to try, and my goal is to finish that this summer, and then shine up, have somebody that I respect sonically, get it as interesting as it can be, and then
so you're doing it at home?
Right now I'm doing it at home.
Yeah.
I have a nice microphone, and I have a cathedral ceiling in the other room, so I can get the bass to sound. It's a chance to have your bass recorded like you really wanted to, I guess.
Right. Okay.
It's hard to come by, so.
Yeah.
So it's one of those, like, do it on your own terms and see what people think. In a way, it's like you without the makeup, I guess, or how you think how you really look, instead of what someone else's idea of how you sound is,
Is there a particular record where you're particularly fond of your recorded sound, where you say that's very close to how you hear it?
Well, I think sometimes on my own records it's pretty close. There's trying to think of a record where I actually play my own bass, which that doesn't happen that much anymore either now. It's like, there's a Tony Malaby record called Adobe that's Paul Motion. It's just trio, and I think it sounds good on that. I used to love
beautiful record.
I used to love the bass booth at Systems 2. That was kind of like my favorite space to play in, but I think they're closed now, so that's gone, alas. But
in a way, it's maybe weird to say it, but I think your sound is very close to your voice, actually.
Oh, well, thanks. That's not thanks, but that's interesting though, because I feel like that's kind of how you work on your sound, is kind of envisioning you as an actor in a stage play or something, where and also the approach to rhythm and soloing, or even playing time. You could just say, well, I'm going to adopt this speaking voice at this time, and again, you can fashion your technique to produce whatever sound you want on the instrument. Really, I think it's a broad palette. I'm surprised that there isn't more variety amongst people's playing sounds these days, frankly. Although maybe I'm out of it that way too. I think Return to Gut Strings changes that approach too, though. I think, in a way, or synthetic gut strings. It's more of an ideal, and it's more of a unified sound across players, almost like the Rudy Van Gelder piano in a way. Kind of people sound kind of homogenous in a certain way, but
it's weird, yeah. Like because it sounds like Herbie, and
yeah, right.
It's weird. They didn't sound like that. Yeah. I sometimes
it's comping, it's like
yeah. Or Andrew Hill sounds like Herbie, or or Bobby Timmons. I sometimes envision those records having the Columbia sound, having the having the Columbia sound, and then how that music would maybe resonate with me. Although I love the Blue Note sound as a whole sound, as a
it'd be interesting to hear those records that with a different tonality to them. I don't know if I like them. I'm so attached to them the way they are.
Of course.
It would be cool to hear something different. Yeah.
It's like I collect a lot of bootlegs, and sometimes you get the same bootleg from another source, so you get the soundboard recording, but then you get something that's where somebody's set in this, seventh row, and you get another feeling out of the same concert, that can tell you other stories, and that makes you wonder actually, how would it sound if I would hear that record in another, without the reverb or with reverb, or
I know my appreciation of the Beatles skyrocketed when I was listening to one of their records in my car, and two of the speakers were blown out. So actually all but one speaker. And so all I could hear was George Harrison's rhythm guitar, and just the variety of approaches and sounds and how it interfaced with the songs themselves was just amazing. It's like, man, dude, the attention to detail with what those guys are doing is just, I don't think even though it's been well studied, I think it's just really extraordinary, So it was cool to hear it just because my speakers weren't working.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's heavy.
It's a life lesson in itself, You're experiencing something bad, your car is broken or your system is broken, but it makes you appreciate something else that you thought you like already.
And I may never have noticed into that level,
Right.
There's an opportunity with everything.
Yeah. It's nice. But variety in sound is also something that I really admire, from you, that when you play a line, not every note sounds the same. Every note breathes. Breathes in a different way, and although you're doing so many things at once, like challenging yourself in a rhythmic and harmonic way, melodic way, on top of that comes your sound, where every note has a life of its own.
Well, I definitely went to school with that from Gary. I just felt like he really, there was always life in whatever he chose to do, or still is, And but I think part of that just comes from really not deciding until that moment what you're going to do. And there are people that can bring it to things they've played many times and bring that vitality to it, and I totally respect that. But I think, I have the feeling myself that if I played really worked out stuff, that I wouldn't be the salesman I would need to be for that. Like people could tell either not really there. I can't make eye contact with them sonically because this is worked out, man. And so I feel like I owe it to people to not do that. But I respect it. Like somebody like Niels Henning Orsted Pedersen, I think is amazing bassist, but I also feel like sometimes his improvising had chunks of material that was strung together, artfully so, but that it was, maybe it's a bass playing equivalent to Oscar Peterson in a certain way, like philosophically. And while I respect it, I can't ever imagine him sounding bad or whatever, but I would like to imagine that actually.
How it would sound, yeah.
You know, like on his worst. I want to hear people on their worst day. You know, just check what that is. Whatever they think that is. You know, because that would reveal a lot about them too, or their best. You know, like what do they think is their finest playing? You know, I don't know. I don't even think that way. Really.
Yep.
Only because there is no finest playing.
Have you heard that record, Niels Henning, Østrid Petersen with Archie Shepp, Looking at Bird?
Is that also online?
Could be online. I don't know. It's a steeplechase record. It's very interesting. Those two characters together. Archie
I'd
Shepp,
like to hear that. Yes.
And they play bird stuff, and I really like that record because
cool.
Steeplechase.
I'm trying to write it down here.
Oh, I can send it to you also.
Okay, great. So it's called what at Bird?
Looking at Bird.
Looking at Bird. Okay.
I mean, cool. He's also not my favorite bassist, you know, but still.
I dig him in a lot. I mean, I like his time.
Oh yeah.
You know, something to like in everybody that, you know, if you know their name, I feel like you know them. You know their names for a reason.
Absolutely, yeah.
They're great at something.
What is the last thing that has really, you know, gotten to you emotionally on an emotional level?
I was recently blown away by the soundtrack to the third season of Twin Peaks that was just released in the David Lynch series.
Yeah.
I think he does all of the sound design. I mean, he's not. I don't think he's composing this music, but there is some wild stuff going on.
Absolutely, yeah.
There.
I think he worked together again with what's the guy with the Italian name, who also did the music for the first two seasons, and to some of, I think, a lot of his other movies as well.
Right. There's have you seen that season of that show?
I have. I love it.
I think there's a scene in episode 8 or something where it's like Jim Belushi and his brother, they're the casino owner guys, and they're scheming on. They're gonna have to kill whatever his name was, the guy that made the run on all the slot machines. Kyle MacLachlan's character.
Dougie Jones.
Dougie Jones. And they have those 3 women in the cocktail dresses, like flitting around, and there's this ominous trombone music, and then over top is this brushes and upright bass, and just the juxtaposition and how it interfaced with the conversation and everything was just pure genius. And I probably wouldn't have even noticed it for the most part. But I love the way film music enhances.
Absolutely.
That sort of thing. And you get this sense of mood or emotional state that, you know, that's what I'm going to try and get to with this solo project, frankly, is to just create a feeling and get out, create another feeling, get out, you know, and it's really not about development or anything else. Just take you to a place, experience it for a minute, and then next. So I don't know.
But that makes total sense to me. But the Twin Peaks is the third season actually goes back to me, or reminds me now about what you said about creating expectations and then going the other way, you know, because we've all been waiting for Twin Peaks for another shot at Twin Peaks for such a long time. And he's like saying almost like, okay, you want Twin Peaks? You want some more Twin Peaks? You're not gonna get it. But these are some of the, you know, here's some callbacks for you nerds out there. But I'm not the same guy who did a TV show like 25 years ago or whatever. He's a different person, you know, and so what he did with that character of everybody wanted that detective to be back there again on a new case or whatever, you know, but he's like an imbecile who likes coffee and kind of
I'll give you, and the most evil guy ever, you know, both, you know, like, it's genius. You know, it's like, yeah, I'll give you what you want, but I'm going to give it to you in the way that I want. You know, yeah, that's total manipulation there.
Yeah.
I love the behind the scenes footage of how he's working. You know, it's really an old school auteur kind of thing. You know, like he's totally, it's his vision kind of period. You know, which I don't know. I respect it, but just the thought of ever working that way myself is like cardiac arrest waiting to happen. It's me too. I'm not that guy.
All right, Drew. I want to thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Pablo. It's my pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
I really enjoyed talking with you.
Okay. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You too.